In tonight's story, we meet a young woman called Clara Wilde, who receives an intriguing parcel from Paris. The gift is from her adventurous grandmother, Eliza Wilde, and contains a remarkable item which helps soothe Clara's unsettled mind. I'm your narrator, Pauline Constantine, and this is A Parcel from Paris by Gillian Rogerson. On a frosty morning in February, a young woman called Clara Wilde answered a knock at her front door. The postman handed her a parcel wrapped in brown paper. A glance at the handwritten address caused joy to fill Clara's heart. The postman pointed to the distinctive signature on the corner of the parcel and said, "Eliza Wilde. Off on her travels again, is she? I don't know where your grandmother gets her energy from." "Neither do I," Clara replied with a smile. "She's unstoppable. Thank you for this." They said goodbye, and Clara closed the door. She made a mug of tea and settled down in front of the cozy log fire in the living room with the parcel on her lap. Clara ran a hand over the perfectly wrapped package to savor the moments before opening it. There was the slightest hint of her grandmother's rose perfume coming from the paper, which brought many wonderful memories floating into Clara's mind. Taking her time, she carefully unwrapped the item to reveal a lilac-covered box. Inside that was another box, this one covered in pale purple silk and fastened with a violet ribbon. A folded letter lay on top with a message for Clara to read it before opening the next box. Clara unfolded the letter and began to read. "My darling Clara, bonjour from Paris. I feel so lucky to be back in this amazing city. Do you remember when we came here when you were 16? What an amazing time we had. That charming cafe with the fabulous hot chocolate is still here. That's the first place I went to when I arrived. My thoughts were full of you all the time I was in that delightful place, sipping my decadently rich chocolate. I went somewhere after my fortifying hot chocolate, a delightful boutique not far from that cafe. It's one I visited a long, long time ago. I bought you a very special present, which is in the box wrapped in silk. No peeking at it until you've read my letter. I know you're just as impatient as me, but bear with me. I have to tell you how I came upon that shop, and how I met a woman who's left a lasting impression on me, Madame Devereux. But first, how are you, my precious girl? Moving house, changing jobs, and leaving your familiar village behind is quite a challenge you've taken on. When we next speak, I want to know everything, every little detail. And I know there's no point telling you not to worry about these changes in your life, because worrying is something we're both guilty of. The story I'm going to tell you, and the gift I've sent, might help a little with your concerns. You know that I lived in Paris for a few months when I was a bit younger than you, but I've never given you the full details behind that journey. Not only did I leave my beloved parents behind, but I also left a job too. A job that I didn't even start. I'd got a position at a local solicitor's, doing general office work. Everyone thought it was the perfect job for a young woman of my standing, whatever that meant. It sounded as dull as ditch water to me. As the starting day for that job got closer, my heart felt heavier and heavier. I just knew I couldn't face working there. But instead of doing the sensible thing and looking for a more suitable occupation, I withdrew my savings from the post office and bought myself a ticket to Paris on the next available ship. I won't go into details about the lecture I got from my parents when I told them of my plans. You have enough of a vivid imagination to picture how that conversation went. I do regret the hurt I caused my parents, but I couldn't see that at the time. I wanted an adventure, and I was determined to have one. It was only foolhardy bravery and youthful ignorance which kept my spirits high as I sailed across the English Channel on the night ferry. I was still blissfully happy as I boarded the train to Paris hours later. Oh, the hustle and bustle when I first stepped off that train. The gloriously exuberant conversations coming from all around me were incomprehensible. I'd learnt French at school and considered myself fluent, but I couldn't understand one single word coming from anyone. As I walked along the streets of Paris, I had to keep checking my feet were still on the ground, because I felt like I was flying with the sheer joy of being in such a romantic city. Of course, it was the Eiffel Tower which caught my attention first. How could it not? Standing there, so proud and tall, as if saying, "Yes, you're right. I am spectacular. You may gaze upon me." Other sights were just as magnificent. Can you remember when you first saw them too? The elegant Champs-Élysées leading to the arched beauty of the Arc de Triomphe. Elegant boats sailing leisurely along the blue expanse of the River Seine. The Gothic beauty of the Notre Dame Cathedral. It wasn't just the architecture of Paris which took my breath away. It was the people. I was in awe at how glamorous and self-assured they were, laughing so loudly, holding hands freely, and blatantly kissing each other right there on the street. I blushed so much when I first witnessed that. The Parisians were full of such joie de vivre, and they didn't care about what others thought of them. Isn't that a spectacular way to live? I have to be truthful here. Upon watching those confident people for a while, I began to consider myself extremely shabby and dull in my sensible tweed skirt and jacket. My well-worn brogues seemed suddenly too large and clumsy for my feet. I felt like such an imposter, as if I had no place in such a beautiful city. All of a sudden, some bothersome worries decided to float into my mind. They do that sometimes, don't they? With my head bowed and my eyes downcast, I shuffled my way to the hotel without meeting anyone's eye. So lost in my melancholy that I didn't notice a woman heading my way until I'd bumped right into her. I mumbled an apology and tried to walk around her, but she put her hand gently on my arm to stop me. In a voice full of concern, she asked me why I looked so sad. Thankfully, her English was much better than my French. I raised my head and looked into the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. I guessed the woman to be around my mother's age, but her smooth complexion and air of compassion gave her an ageless look, as peculiar as that sounds. Her nipped-in jacket and skirt were elegant, and her hair was arranged in a sophisticated chignon. The most beautiful scarf was draped stylishly around her neck. It was awash with swirls and curls of pastel-hued colours. It looked like dozens of tiny rainbows had decided to gracefully repose on it. There was something so trustworthy about the woman that I told her how I didn't belong in such a beautiful city with such confident people, and that I was heading back to England. She listened without saying a word. When I'd finished, she said, "Before you go home, my English rose, I would like to tell you a story. Let me introduce myself. I'm Madame Devereux. May I take your name?" "Eliza Wilde," I replied shyly. Then we shook hands in a most grown-up manner. Madame Devereux asked me to accompany her to a cafe along the street, where she insisted on buying me lunch. We sat outside on wooden chairs and gazed at the River Seine, whilst we sipped coffee and ate delicate pastries. When we'd finished eating, Madame Devereux asked me if I'd heard the fable of the old woman and the 7 worries. I admitted I hadn't, and so she relayed the tale to me. "And now, my lovely Clara, I'm going to tell you this fable. A long time ago, there lived an old woman who had a cottage on the edge of a forest. She considered herself the most fortunate of people, because she had been blessed with many good fortunes in her life. She awoke every day with a smile on her face and a heart full of joy. As she went about her day, she would often pause, lift her chin, and count her blessings. So content and cheerful was she, that she spread happiness wherever she went. She cared deeply about her neighbours and friends, and would go out of her way to help them. Nothing was too much trouble for her. People felt better about themselves, just by being in her presence. Despite her peaceful mind, there came a day when tiresome thoughts got the better of her. It started one morning when the old woman was strolling through the forest. Out of nowhere, thoughts came to her about her 7 daughters. Were they okay? She hadn't heard from them in a while. Why hadn't they been in touch? Her brow furrowed at those thoughts. Then her musings turned to her 7 sons. Were they eating enough? They never took good enough care of themselves. More vexing thoughts tumbled into the woman's mind, like a snowball rolling down a hill, collecting more and more snow as it went. It was disconcerting to have a mind full of worries about things which hadn't even happened. She gave a determined shrug, as if she were flinging the thoughts off her shoulders. She imagined the worries melting away, like ice cream on a warm summer's day. And yet, despite her determination to feel better, the thoughts wouldn't cease. The old woman knew she had to do something to stop them. She stopped walking and raised her face to the sky. One by one, she counted her blessings. She thought about her beloved 7 daughters and her treasured 7 sons, their beautiful faces and the sound of their laughter. How they'd felt in her arms when they were tiny babes, all the warm hugs and gentle kisses she'd given them. She brought to mind her 7 acres of land and the carefree animals who lived on it, the rabbits hopping through the grass, the hedgehogs snuffling through the bushes, horses and deer wandering freely over the fields. Next, she considered how lucky she was to have so many dear friends nearby, and thought about all the delightful moments and cherished celebrations they'd shared, and the laughter. There had been a lot of that, even when the grey clouds appeared in the sky and a cold rain began to fall. The woman kept her face turned up as she recounted her numerous blessings. She decided to find a way to keep those blessings alive in her mind. An idea came to her, so she headed home immediately and found the beautiful silk scarf her eldest daughter had sent to her. After filling a small glass bottle with water, she placed the scarf on the kitchen table and smoothed it out. She let her worries float naturally to the front of her mind. She dipped a pipette into the bottle and withdrew water into it. She proceeded to drop water onto the scarf. Each droplet represented a worry. One after the other, the water drops landed on the scarf. The woman ran out of worries before she ran out of water. Once her mind was empty of things that had never happened, she found 6 phials of her favorite colored paint. She proceeded to cover the silk in many cheerful hues. The drops of color on the scarf symbolized the many blessings in her life. Some of the colors ran into each other and caused new shades. It wasn't long before the scarf was covered in bright, swirling colors. The woman knew the worries were beneath the colors, but that didn't matter anymore, because she wasn't giving them any attention. And in time, she completely forgot what those concerns were. But she never forgot her good fortunes, because they were brightly represented on the silky material. Not a day went by when she didn't wear that beautiful scarf of blessings. Clara, it was at this point that Madame Devereux stopped talking and unwound the garment from her neck. She held it up and explained how she'd made her own scarf of blessings years ago, as had many of her friends. She told me about a boutique where I could make my own scarf. She went on to say there wouldn't be a charge for it, because the owner of the establishment was a descendant of the old woman from the fable, or so the locals claimed, and the owner always provided them free of charge to people who needed them. Well, you've admired my scarf many times over the years, and now you know where I got it from. I know it's seen better days, but I still feel a rush of gratitude for all the wonderful things in my life whenever I wear it. I've taken it on all the adventures I've been on. Let me tell you, Clara, it hasn't just been used as a scarf, amongst many other things. I've used it to hold parts of a rickety car together, fastened it around my broken backpack when I climbed the Himalayas, and used it to flag down a ship the time I was stranded on an island in Indonesia. I shall tell you more about those trips in another letter. As soon as I'd finished talking to Madame Devereux that fine day in Paris, I called in at the boutique and had a delightful time, making my scarf of many blessings. To be honest with you, by the time I arrived at that charming shop, my mind was almost free of worries, but one or two remained stubbornly in my mind. Once inside that shop, I chose the brightest shades I could find to decorate my scarf. You know how I like my bright colours. With each drop of colour, I began to count the good things in my life. I had so many, and as I thought about them, more and more appeared in my mind. It wasn't long before I felt braver and more confident. I felt like I could tackle anything. I was certain I was suddenly inches taller, or it seemed that way to me. Sure, I was in a strange city where I could barely understand the locals, but that wasn't going to stop me having an adventure. No way. I stayed in Paris for a couple of months. I had one amazing experience after the other. I soon became fluent in French, so much so that I could even sing in that romantic language. I'm not sure the Parisians appreciated my singing voice, but they were too polite to ever say anything to me. It wasn't long before I confidently wandered the streets and discovered some splendid shops and restaurants. I even danced along the riverbanks of the Seine, with only the moon and stars to light my way. You may be wondering who I danced with. I'm smiling now as I write this. Clara, I danced by myself. My heart was full of such joy and love that the only way I could express it was by dancing. The Parisians most likely considered me a little crazy, but I didn't care. I had the time of my life in Paris and met lots of amazing people who became lifelong friends. I'll share more adventures with you in future letters, as I'm sure you're keen to open the package now and see what's inside. Although I'm sure you've already guessed what it is. Am I right? For now, my darling granddaughter, I shall say goodbye. I'll write again soon. Clara smiled at the letter and placed it to one side, knowing she would read it many more times. But her grandmother was right. She was keen to open the package from Paris. She unwrapped the pale purple silk to reveal a cream-coloured box. Inside the box, Clara found an exquisite silk scarf, which was as white as freshly fallen snow. 7 miniature bottles were nestled between the folds of the fabric. She picked one up and saw it was full of a clear liquid, which she assumed to be water. A postcard was peeping out from beneath the scarf. Clara pulled it free and smiled at the iconic image of the Eiffel Tower. Turning it over, she read more of her grandmother's words. My dearest Clara, you can now make your own scarf of many blessings. Start with those troublesome worries and let them fade into the fabric and be forgotten. Then have fun with the colours. Remember, my darling, that even on the greyest days, you can lift your face to the sky and recall your good fortune. May your heart be full of love. May your footsteps be as light as wishes. May your eyes twinkle with dreams yet to come true. My love to you, always, Grandmother.